What's up, guys? Can you hear me? Can you see me and hear me? Hopefully so. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining us. Cool. I see. Yeah, what's up, Marshall? What's up, Jen? Alessandro? Nice. Okay, good. All right, I'm going to try to talk with one earphone in. There's a little bit of a delay. I don't know if you guys have ever been on the phone and heard yourself talking back to yourself. It's a little distracting. So I've taken one earphone out and hopefully that'll help. So if I stutter, you'll know why. For those of you joining us that don't know who I am, I'm Barrett Lewis, the composer for Flight School's Manifest 99 VR experience. Excited and honored and humbled to be sharing with you what it was like to work on such a cool project, and also share my creative process for writing the music for this incredible, unique VR narrative right here directly from my home studio where all of the music was born. This is totally inclusive discussion, so please feel free to chime in with comments and questions along the way, so it's not just me running my mouth for an hour. By the way, this was made possible by my man Justin Glad here. Hello. Who helped figure out how to get all of this streaming live across multiple platforms. People make it look so easy, but it's actually not that easy. So we apologize in advance for any potential technical difficulties if they happen to occur. Hopefully not. But if they do, you can promptly blame him. So if you haven't had the chance yet to check out Manifest 99, by all means do so. It's available from Steam, Oculus, PlayStation VR, and HTC Vive. $5.99 is the price point. Totally worth it. It's incredibly engaging, an interactive story with multiple layers of meaning and emotion. I personally love this piece, not just because I was a part of it, but because it really dives into the deep end of what it means to tell an interactive story in VR, which is not easy to do, and this one is really successful at it. Some VR experiences are games and some are just stories that you watch and don't interact with. But this one falls right into this really cool in-between, a truly interactive story in virtual reality. So super cool. Flight School did a killer job pioneering that space in VR. So check it out if you haven't already. But hopefully you have, and that's why you're here. So what I want to do with all of you in this moment is share some clips of music, which, by the way, if you're not listening with headphones or good speakers, please take a moment to grab some if you can. There's a lot of tiny subtleties that you'll miss if all you have is a laptop set of speakers or cell phone speakers. So we'll listen to some music, and then I'll show you the creative process of how I arrived at what you're hearing, and then we'll actually dive into a scene and score that scene from start to finish using this software that I use. And by the way, this software it's all virtual orchestration is sort of the general term for it, and it's a fancy way of saying synthesizer. So if you guys have ever had a synthesizer that you hold down a key and select a patch that's the strings or the organ, and it's doing its best to sound like one of those instruments, that's essentially what this is, but just a super fancy version of that. But the end goal is for this digital orchestration, this digital orchestra, to sound as realistic as possible. Not unlike, when we create a CG character for a live action plate, and we want that to look as real as possible. Same thing here. So let's talk about the story. Manifest 99. It takes place, for the most part, in the afterlife, and is centered around the lives of 4 characters. For those who haven't experienced it yet, I'll try to avoid any spoilers and just say that the goal is to help the main character find reconciliation through engaging in the other characters' life histories. And essentially, by navigating through their stories is the path to remembrance and resolve. I mean, how cool is that? It's an incredibly profound basis for a story in VR. So let's talk about the music. Music is the language of emotion. And since there's no dialogue in Manifest 99, it leaves a lot of room for the music to help communicate and emphasize the emotions of its story. Now, the experience is dynamic and transcends through multiple emotional moments, but I like to start simple and kind of identify a basic foundation first upon which to build on. So when Adam Volker is the director, by the way, awesome guy, amazingly talented. When he and I sat down about this project, our first conversation took us right into the weeds. I mean, that the story is fairly complex and profound, so it was real easy for us to just get right into the, first it starts here, and then it goes here, and then this happens, and then there's these characters in this order, and then it all gets really exciting. But we realized we needed to simplify what we were saying and describe the overarching emotion. By the way, this image is Plutchik's color wheel, or wheel of emotions, and I like looking at this thing because it really helps musically identify where the tonality should land when you're talking about the emotions. So Adam and I were talking, and we needed to simplify the overarching emotion of Manifest 99, knowing that throughout the story it will dynamically change in order to move the story from start to finish. So what we ended up with was, if we could describe it as the pursuance of redemption.
Sorry, Barrett.
So one second.
Diagram better.
Doing something on the chat box here. So the pursuance of redemption, that's what we ended up with. It sounds simple enough, but what does that sound like? So if you were to describe that musically, what would you hear? And so my task obviously was to determine what musical vocabulary or musical palette could describe that. And on top of this, the story constantly shifting, with the inclusion of other emotions like fear, love, surprise, all those things happen kind of locally during the story. The theme had to represent the pursuance of redemption, but also be flexible and inclusive enough to include those other emotions as well. So in looking at this color wheel, you can see, if I were to describe pursuance of redemption, well, that kind of opens the question of why might a character need to pursue redemption. And I would say that the bottom left there in between purple and blue is possibly because there's some remorse. Maybe it's because there's some grief, or maybe because something that you're shameful of, or that you want to right some sort of wrongdoing would motivate that pursuance of redemption. So remorse is kind of the emotion that we're going for there. So let me play for you what I ended up with after a few days of noodling on the piano. I ended up with this melody, and this is just going to be the piano by itself. So by the way, what you're seeing now is MIDI. MIDI is it's an acronym. It stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, I think. And it's really, it's been around for a long time and has really evolved, but what you're seeing here is a lot like traditional notation on staff paper, except it's more specific on technical things, like you can see, if I can point here, you see my mouse here. Here is a velocity, and that's how hard I'm hitting the keys on the keyboard. So that's why those are varying in color and varying in height. And then this area here is actually when I'm holding the sustain pedal down and lifting it on the piano. So what's cool is I can record this, and I'll play it for you, and it sounds like a real piano. But what it's actually doing is it's playing back based on the MIDI data and simulating the sound of the piano. So, but here's the basic foundational theme that I ended up for Manifest. So there you go. Sorry about the little glitch there, but that was fun trying to find that, because I would play something, and this is kudos to my wife and her part of this, very important part of this. I would play something and look over at her and ask her, is this sounding where we should go? And I messed with it for at least a few days before arriving at that. But you know, so why that melody? It's in D minor, which is Hans Zimmer's favorite key signature, by the way, D minor. It's a random fact. But I use that because, you know, for me, minor key, if some of you have taken music classes, you know, a minor key usually sounds sad and a major key usually sounds happy. And going back to the pursuance of redemption or remorse, you know, remorse is kind of sad. So that's why the minor key, excuse me. And then it's also in 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, kind of like a waltz. And I like that because, well, it's interesting, as opposed to the typical 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 you hear on the radio every day. 3 is a waltz, and therefore kind of hopeful in a timeless and familiar way. So combining those things, you know, ended up, I think, a successful melody, and it ends up being very simple. And that's the cool thing, is that you'll spend so much time just finding the few little notes that it takes, much like the design process. It's like you end up with a successful graphic design, and a lot of times it's not very complicated, and a lot of people will look at it and go, like the Nike swoosh, like, well, yeah, that's super easy. I could have done that in 5 minutes. Well, it's all of the processes and all of the versions that it took to get to that successful design. In this case, this successful melody. Although very simple, it sounds like it should have been there the whole time. So that's the goal in writing a melody. But remember, this had to also be flexible. So I'm going to play it for you again, but this time it's actually in a major key. So check this out. I'm going to mute my mic here beforehand, eliminate some noise. All right. So yeah, same melody, but generally centered around a major key this time. So because of that, now we're starting to blend the colors, going back to this color wheel. We've got some remorse, but then we've got this, if we mix yellow or so, let's go back to this chart. This is cool. Yeah, so up at the top there, some joy, a little bit to the right of that, some love. You mix blue and yellow together and you get some of those green tones in there: submission, trust, apprehension, acceptance. Look at that. So, much like a color palette, you start to blend these sort of emotions together using the language of music. And one cool trick here is at the end, I'm gonna show you kind of one of the advantages of using MIDI. So I'm gonna play this last little bit and how the melody ends. Now, because I'm recorded in MIDI instead of actually waveform, I can take this last little chord here. That's a D minor chord. I'm going to do something. I'm going to change it to a G minor chord. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I'm going to play it for you again, and when it ends on this last note, instead of the musical phrase, okay, this is a language and we're speaking in phrases, you have punctuation. And so at the end of this, instead of ending on the D minor chord, which would be like a period, ending the phrase with a period, changed it to a G minor, which is a relative chord. I won't get into bore you with the details of musical theory, but you'll notice it's a little bit more of maybe a comma or even a question. So check this out. Isn't that cool? It's a subtle change, but right there, it's like, okay, well, where do we go from there? It's like a comma, like I said, or some sort of a bridge to open up to another phrase. So that's what's cool about MIDI and composing digitally, is you can go back after, I recorded this performance live. I literally just hit record and played on the piano. And then this was the data that it recorded, and then you can go back and change your performance or change a chord, and it makes composing super fast. So let me play for you this melody being played by a full orchestra. mute the mic again.
You did?
Hey, I apologize, guys. That looped on me. I'm gonna do this one again. All right, from the top, and a 1 and a 2. We got the French horns opening, and then some sort of anxiety from the strings, and then the melody being played initially by the piano, and then all of the orchestra comes in. And so anyway, one more time from the top. Sorry about the mishap there. So yeah, that's the melody being played by the whole orchestra. Sorry again for the mishap there. Now, something really cool, fun fact about that piece is that it was removed from the experience, and there was a good reason for it, because at where that piece was placed in the story, I had taken the emotion too far. So this version feels like sort of a, oh my God, what have I done type of guilt or realization. But this is where it's important to listen to the director. Adam said to me that we should focus on the positive being that the character is learning from his mistakes, and that's a good thing. And so therefore it's more encouraging and less full of remorse. Um, so we cut it, and that's okay because it's a good thing. Ultimately, as a composer, your job is to serve the picture and uphold the director's vision. The music is actually not about you, but it's about the story being told. So advice to other composers out there, or any artist involved in storytelling, is to let go of the work that you create. Be willing to just let it go, because if it doesn't fit the goal of the project, it has to get cut, and the project is bigger than any one of us. So by the way, composing for VR is thankfully not that different from a game or a film, in the sense that the goal is still the same. For interactive moments, the music needs to be implemented in a kind of loopable and cueable layer or set of layers. And for any cinematic moments, the scenes that have a predetermined length, you're essentially post-scoring to picture. The coolest challenges were seamlessly transitioning the music from an interactive moment to a scripted moment. The most obvious version of that being a crossfade in between two pieces. But Adam and I wanted to make sure that any transitions were not obvious, which crossfades can tend to be. So I broke out the musics into more instrument sections that could overlap with each other and be cued according to the viewer's decisions in the experience. We had a question. What was the...
Oh, you answered it. The cinematic, the exact question.
Oh, okay. You're answering for me?
No, I was. You asked what the question was. It was about the cinematicness. Trying to find the exact question again.
Yeah. So I mean, this experience to me is like a silent film, and it's very cinematic. And I think that any time there's an opportunity to kind of create that sense of cinematic soundscape or musicscape, I really like that, because it's all about emotions. It's when we say cinematic, what we really mean is emotional. Does the music grab us emotionally? And those are the best parts in any film or game, is when that emotion is just tuned in just right and it pulls on your heartstrings. That's that to me defines what it means for music to be cinematic. So going back to the VR aspect of this, music is kind of background and sort of internal. So there's no need to go for any sort of binaural effect. That's where music is spatially placed. So depending on, where you're looking, where a sound is being emitted can change. I don't think that that's necessary for music unless your whole experience is based around that sort of effect or gimmick. Music is a lot more of an internal voice, and I think that binaural effect is best left to sound design, where it becomes imperative, actually, that the sounds are location based. If something happens over here, it may cue you to look over there, or depending on whatever the situation is, having the sounds actually coming from what's happening in the scene makes a lot more sense for sound design. So, you guys want to score a scene? How much time we have? Perfect. All right, let's do it. Yeah. Okay, so I picked a scene for us, and it is. Let me unmute this stuff. Give me a second here. I got to be real, real careful of what I unmute and what I mute. Very tedious process. Okay, there's that, and then I'm gonna set this up for you. So about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so into the experience is a flashback. Flashback is one of those moments where you look into the eyes of a character. In this case, I chose the bear. And you get transported into a moment in their life, and you get to kind of get a backstory of where they came from. And I'll play this scene for you first silently, so I can just sort of talk through it. So I'm gonna mute all this stuff. So here's the bear, obviously in attire to go to war or something. He's got a gun on his shoulder, backpack. Wife shows up, gives him a watch, they hug. Beautiful animation. And it's a very theater-like effect where he walks out of the door and now he's on the battlefield. Hopefully you can see that okay. It's kind of dark there. And then kind of a moment where he's reflecting on his comrades and looks at his watch, and then he boards this train. Now, when this happens, we already know as viewers what happens to this train. And this is potential spoiler, hopefully not. But the train crashes in the very beginning of the experience. It's the first thing that happens. So this is a flashback. So it's really important to note because we as viewers know what happens to this train, but the bear doesn't know what happens to this train when he's about to board it. So that's important. Let me come back to that. I'll go ahead and unmute all of this and then play for you what I ended up with. Sorry guys, there was one track that should have been muted. Let me start that one over for you. I apologize. Here we go. There you go. So that's what we ended up with for the final product. And I know it got really loud there for a second.
So a couple questions, or one
yeah.
question real quick. Somebody asked, do you use a click track to find a tempo that hits key moments before you begin composing the scene?
That's a great question. Do I use a click track? Yes. I at least start there. So in this case, you know, I had kind of written the main melody to be in 3, and if you look very closely right here, I can't really zoom in, but it says the time signature there. And I can actually turn the click track on, and you can hear what that sounds like. So click track is very important. It makes writing in this format in MIDI really helpful, because everything sort of lines up to a grid, and so it makes editing a lot more clear. So I try to stick to that as much as I can. That helps keep track of, you know, what measure that I'm on, and if I need to do any editorial changes, I can sort of notate for myself, hey, this requires 1 extra measure, or even like an extra measure of just 2 or 4, or then I can add those in and be organized with it. This is also important if I were to export this out as a score for musicians to play. You know, if we have the budget to hire real musicians, or hell, even a full orchestra, that would be super important that all of the music is ready to go. So yeah, click track.
So another question, is that you playing the guitar?
That is, yeah. So my 2 instruments that I use are piano and guitar. I am much more of a guitar player than I am a pianist. I can play piano good enough to be able to play a melody like this. You know, it's very simple and gentle, but going crazy with solos and really advanced playing, I only got to a certain level, and decided I wanted to be a guitar player at like 11 years old. So those are the 2 instruments that I use. Piano is really common for composers because it's just, you have the entire range, you know, 88 keys of low to high end register, and just visualizing the shapes of chords and notes is very clear. You know, the piano, all of the white notes are what they call the naturals, and all the black notes are what they call the accidentals, the sharps and flats, if you will. So it's really easy to visualize, and so I use it as a tool when I'm composing. In this case, that sort of brings us to why guitar at that moment. So let me bring up this video one more time, and I'll break down my thinking on why my musical choices. Let me make this a little smaller here. By the way, let me show you my setup real quick. This is kind of cool. So this is my keyboard. I had to elevate my mouse so that it could float above the keyboard. You can see that. And then I'm using a Wacom Pro 16. This is one of the newer Wacom models. It'll go up to 4K resolution, which is awesome. So when I'm writing, I also I paint and design, so it's really helpful to go into Photoshop and Illustrator to use this, but it's super helpful to use this for music as well. And then, my keyboard there, if you can see that. And anyway, I was kind of proud of myself for figuring out how to hover these things above the keyboard, so I didn't have to slide my keyboard out every time I needed to use it. So this is my little spaceship. Okay, back to the good stuff.
So, Barrett, let's get on to that scoring part.
Yeah, let's get on to the scoring part.
About that online scoring.
I know. So
let's get on to that.
All right. Seriously. Okay, back to this. So I'm gonna put that there. Let's break this down into the cues, the emotional cues. So the first thing is the intimacy that you see here. We've got a really quiet scene between this bear and his wife, and so therefore I use the guitar for the main melody here. And by the way, this is the first time in the experience you'll hear this melody. There's a lot of, I wanted to wait until it was relevant, and I thought it was relevant for the first time here. And the guitar is very intimate, in my opinion, because it's very gentle. It's not a very loud instrument, and it just kind of has this calming, romantic kind of tone to it. So that's why using the guitar for the melody here. And then moving a little bit forward, there's this hug, and I'll show you what I do to respond, musically to that without being obvious about it. But that embrace is kind of a new surge in emotion. So maybe we have this emotion and we just kind of turn the volume up a little bit, just enough, because of that hug. And then he moves off, and this is kind of, this is a different scene, but you could have gone to, in this war scene here, you could have gone to this sort of like intense action idea musically, but it's just such a short moment, and it's a flashback, and for those reasons it was better to just stay at a certain dynamic level, and then keep the music going. And then the next moment is when he falls to his knees there to kind of honor his comrades, is another important dynamic change there. And then he gets up and he turns and goes into the train, and like I said, we know what's going to happen to this train, so that's really important. So I make a couple musical decisions there, which I'll show you, that are important at that moment. And then we're on the train now with the bear, and this is just the viewer looking around to the left. Look back, and the bear waves at us, and then braces himself, and then falls as the train detaches and goes into the storm of darkness. The storm of darkness. Sorry, I like doing that in the microphone. So that's cool, because it's like he knows what's going to happen to him, and he accepts it. Like, we're cool now. I accept my fate. So another important note on the music. Okay, so let's get into the actual musical decisions here. So before I ended up with the guitar part, this is what I started with. I just played the melody on the piano. So there you go. I started with just the piano in an effort to kind of lay out, kind of sketch, okay, where do I want the melody to go? Where do I want the chord changes? And then I translated that. I'm going to hide that, mute that, to the guitar. So then we had our guitar. You heard that melody. So right there, when he hugs his wife, is when the strings come in. Now, I had figured that out kind of in this piano here. These notes right here, that's the chord. But the piano doesn't have the same kind of sustain as strings do. So I took these notes and I made them strings instead. So now we have guitar and strings, and that's kind of the order that I ended up with. So now we have both of these things. So now we add some harp. I kind of did that with the piano. The harp is just kind of this ethereal, you know, sounding instrument. It's really beautiful. So it's building. So right there, it changes key when he falls to his knees. So that's the musical decision that reflects what's happening there. Is he falls to his knees and it changes right here. Right there. And I liked this set of strings here. This is the violas and the celli. Celli is plural for cello. Right here, they're like breathing. They're kind of inhaling and exhaling right here. So we inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. This is something that I really like about the strings. And you can see this line, these lines, I'm actually drawing with my Wacom, is the dynamic, the expression of those strings, because, you know, this line just represents how much power the string instruments are applying in their bow against the strings. So we've got our strings, we've got the guitar, and then right there's a couple of things happening. You've got tremolo on some strings as the basses. Tremolo is when they're going back and forth really, really fast, because there's like this anticipation about that. So you've got that, and then on top of that you have the celeste, a very cool instrument. And it plays that because it's kind of like a question of, oh shit, what's gonna happen? This sort of mystery. You would recognize the celeste with the Harry Potter melody. See. So that mystery, that wonder, that sort of question is why I added that line right there. So then it just builds up. Let's go back to the video here. Yeah. So just another huge swell. Added the brass in. The brass doesn't come in until that moment. Here's the brass just by itself, which is super fun. That last chord is a very jazzy chord. It's let's see if I can get my piano back here. So it's a minor chord with a major 7 and a 9. And it's such a beautiful chord. I like the jazzy nature of that because, you know, we're kind of seemingly in this World War II moment because, you know, he had gone off to war, and you know, jazz was really big. It's still really big, but it really was getting big in the, you know, the 40s, 30s and 40s. So I liked using that chord for that moment. So going back to the chord here. So that's the reason for that. So there you have it. That's my process and how I think about a scene and break it down into each of the moments and why I use certain instruments to represent certain aspects of the characteristics of the scene. It's only my way of doing it. It's certainly not the right way or the only way. There's a million ways of doing it. Many composers come up with incredible, unique ideas, original ideas to you know, to score a scene. Constantly surprised every day with you know, some of the music that's happening out there. But with all my experiences and studying and being in the film business for 17 years at least, that is the way I do it. So let me play for you this scene one more time from start to finish. Strings for the hug. So much fun. What else? Any other questions?
One comment was they thought it was amazing that how when you were working with the harps that you could actually draw in the intensity.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to talk about the benefit of using your Wacom and the ability to
yeah.
do those
So
kind of things.
that's great. Check this out. This so I'll single out. This is the let's do the violins. This is the second violins. So if I were to just straighten that, hold on, let me copy this so I'm not losing it. So if I would just straighten this, you get a very flat performance. So the strings sound incredible. Today's technology to emulate these instruments is awesome. So, but going back to this, now listen to this performance. So you can see right before the change from this note to this note is a swell. I'll exaggerate this, go way up here. And then right before this note to this note is another swell. I'll exaggerate that, and you can kind of see what happens. Listen to this. So when classical musicians play and they perform, they do this sort of swell before the next note in lines like this, and we're kind of just simulating that with drawing these lines. And this is where the Wacom becomes really helpful, because I can literally just, it's like I'm drawing on paper just doing this. It's so much fun. And you can apply this to any instrument. You can apply this to the horns. You can see, let's go to the French horns here, and you can see, watch them swell. So in this case, since they're not a string instrument, they're a wind instrument, these lines indicate the breath, how much power from their bodies they're blowing into their instrument. So this is the part that takes so long when composing virtually, is that you want to spend some time drawing this and getting these dynamics right, because the more you can get this right and spend some time doing it, the more realistic it will sound, and you know, people will accept it as good music. But it does take some time, you know, like you really have to do this separately for every instrument because, you know, you've got generally 4 French horn players, 4 trumpet players, a trombone 1, trombone 2, bass trombone, and tuba. That makes up the brass section, and they're all separate players, so you want to treat them as such and kind of approach them like some players will be a little bit ahead of the beat or behind the beat, or a little bit louder, a little bit softer, sometimes a little bit sharp, sometimes a little bit flat. And all those things combined together end up contributing to the kind of realism of this virtual orchestra.
Got another question.
Yeah.
It was asked, do you prefer to compose to visuals, or do you prefer to compose before you see anything?
Also a good question. So I had not seen much with Manifest in the beginning, just some clips here and there. And so in arriving at that first melody on the piano, it was without any picture, and you want to end up with something that has the flexibility of, you know, being able to include different instruments, or to change from a major key to a minor key, and that sort of thing, because then when you have that, then it works. And then when you actually get picture and can compose to picture, then you can use all of those tricks, you know, as necessary to adapt it to the scene. So in this case, I had written the the main theme on the piano, but for this scene, it made more sense for the melody to be played by the guitar because of that sort of intimacy and that romance between the bear and his wife.
Now, don't forget to mention the game is out now.
Yeah.
On the website.
All right, guys.
Like that.
I think we should probably wrap it up. Absolutely check out Manifest 99 if you haven't yet. It's super cool. And again, I say that not just because I got to work on it, because I understand the challenges and limitations of VR, and I've seen a lot of experiences that are cool but just not, they don't engage me the way Manifest did. So completely separate from being a part of it, it's an amazing experience. Check it out. Oculus, HTC Vive, Steam, PlayStation VR. It's $5.99. If you don't have the equipment, get the equipment, because there's a whole lot of content coming out and a whole lot more to look forward to from Flight School in particular. But it's definitely worth it, worth your time. Man, I appreciate you joining us this evening on letting me geek out on one of my favorite subjects. We're talking about, I think we've made the decision to create a soundtrack. So we're talking about that right now and trying to see how fast we can get that out. So please stay tuned. Check in with Flight School's announcements. Hopefully in the next month or less, we'll have a soundtrack where you can be able to just hit play and listen to all the music. This being one of those pieces on there. So stay tuned. Thank you again for joining us, and I guess it's time to sign out. You guys have an awesome weekend, and I'll see you on the flip side. All right.